All right, so today we're talking about writing numerical and algebraic expressions. We're going to be taking some notes over them. You should have the notes paper in front of you. It should look exactly like what's on the screen right now. So if you do not have that, raise your hand and let the substitute teacher know. Obviously, I was planning on going through these with you in class altogether, but unfortunately, I can't be at school today. So we're going to go through it in the video, and then when I do come back, we'll go through it all together, and I'll be able to answer any questions you guys have. In the meantime, make sure you're writing down all the blanks with me as I go through the video with you. Make sure if I'm going too fast, you pause it so you can make sure you write everything down. And then when you're done, you'll follow the next set of directions. All right. So an expression, this includes numbers, symbols, and operations. So operations are your like add, subtract, multiply, divide, and they're all grouped together to show the value of something. Here's something really important. An expression does not contain an equal sign. Here's your first blank. And bear with me, it's kind of hard to write on my tablet, so it might be a little bit difficult to read. I'll write as clearly as I can. But an expression does not contain an equal sign. So that's an equation. When you see an equal sign, that's an equation. If you see something with no equal sign, then it's an expression. Something else important that we're going to talk about is variables. A variable is here's your blank, letter that stands for a number. Okay, so it's a letter that stands for a number. That's what a variable is. A coefficient, that's the number that's being multiplied. Multiplied by a variable. I know that's hard to read. Multiplied is the blank there. multiplied, multiplied by variable. So it's the number, usually it's going to be in front of your variable. It can be a positive or a negative number. It can be a fraction, decimal, or a whole number. It doesn't matter as long as it's right next to the letter. So coefficient and a variable are right next to each other. They're going to be touching. A constant is a number all by itself. So it's not attached to a variable, it's separate. Usually it's going to be separated by an add or subtract sign. And a term, this is either a single number or a variable, or numbers and variables multiplied together. So terms are separated by your plus and minus signs. So there's some pictures here to kind of help explain these things. So over here on the right really quick, you don't need to circle it on your paper. I'm just showing you what I'm looking at. This whole thing is an expression. That 4x minus 7, that's an expression. It doesn't have an equal sign, so it's an expression. The 4x is a term and the 7 is a term. They're separated by that subtraction sign there. So 4x is one term, 7 is a second term. So that expression has a total of 2 terms in it. Going over here to the left side to look at those, again, you don't need to circle on your paper, but a coefficient is that 4. That's the number we're multiplying the variable x by. So 4x, 4 is a coefficient, x is the variable, and 4x shows 4 times x. Your subtraction sign, that's your operation sign, your operator. And then again, 7 is your constant because it's all by itself. It's not being multiplied by a variable at all. It is completely on its own. So I know this is kind of confusing, but we're going to go through and do some examples together. So we've got to practice identifying the different parts of the expression below. Use that picture above to help you. But in my first one on the left there, I have 3y plus 7. First thing's easy, the variable. That's your letter. So in this one, your variable is going to be the y. The coefficient is always what's next to the variable. It's being multiplied by the variable. So in this one, since I have 3y, that really shows 3 times y. So my coefficient is the number 3. And last, my constant is the number all by itself. It does not have a variable right next to it. So in this one, when I say 3y plus 7, 7 is all by itself. 7 is the constant. And in this expression, I have 2 terms. I have 3y is a term and 7 is a term. So I have 2 terms in that expression. Moving on to the next one. I've got 22 minus 1/4 x. Again, my variable is always going to be the letter. So in this one, my variable is the letter x. My coefficient is always the number attached to the variable. It's being multiplied by the variable. This time it's a fraction, My coefficient is 1/4. 1/4. It's 1/4 times x. That's what my coefficient is. My constant, again, is the number all by itself. So this time it's going to be the 22. It's not attached to a letter at all. And in this expression, 22 minus 1/4 x, I've got two terms. Remember, they're being separated by my operation symbols, my add and subtract signs. So 22 is one of my terms, and 1/4 x is the other term. So that has two terms in that expression. Moving on to the last one. See if you can do this one on your own. Your variable should be the letter, so find your letter. Your coefficient should be the number attached to the letter, the number that's being multiplied by the letter. And your constant, this time you have two of them, but they are two numbers that are not attached to a variable at all. So take a second, think about it, pause if you need to. Your variable should be W, that's the letter. Your coefficient, you only have one of these. It's the number that we're multiplying W by, and that's a 3. And my constant, I already told you I have two of them. They're the numbers that are all by themselves. So that's going to be the 9 and the 16. Both of those are the constants, 9 and 16, because they are not being multiplied by a variable. In this one, see if you can think about how many terms there are. So remember, my terms are separated by plus and minus signs. So that means 9 is a term, then I have a plus sign. 3W is a term, then I have a minus sign. And 16 is a term. I have a total of 3 terms in this expression this time. Okay? So hopefully you'll get the hang of that. We'll review this again when I come back to class. Go ahead and move on to the next part. We are going to talk about words that tell us when to add, subtract, multiply, and divide. So there are lots of words you can come up with here. I am going to go through them fairly quickly. So if you need to pause to copy down the words, make sure you do that. And I'll write as clear as I possibly can. But for addition, the word that tells us the answer to an addition problem is the word sum. So if you see the word sum, that means you're going to be adding, S-U-M. Some other words, more than. That's a phrase, more than. If I say 6 more than 7, that means 6 plus 7. The word plus tells us to add. Increase. Add, added to, added by. Any version that has the word add in there is obviously going to tell us we're doing addition. Raised. Raised. All together. All together. Total. And the last one I'm going to write is in all. Again, there are more ones that you could say here. I'm just naming the most common ones. Again, I know my handwriting's a little bit messy because it's on the tablet, so bear with me. But if you need to pause and copy these down, do so right now. Again, we have sum, more than, plus, increase, add, raised, all together, total, and in all. I'm going to go ahead and move on to subtraction. So I'm going to start with the answer to a subtraction problem. That's called a difference. So difference is your first word on the subtraction side. Next, we have less than. What you're going to notice is we're going to have a lot of opposites. So addition and subtraction are going to have a lot of opposites. So instead of plus, we're going to say minus. Decrease. Next, we have subtract. subtracted by, subtracted from. Anything that has the word subtract in it. Lower, drop. 2 more. Fewer, and the last one is left over. Again, I know it's sloppy. I'm doing my best to write as neatly as I can, but I'll go through this list again, so pause it if you need to copy these down if you're not done. We have difference, less than, minus, decrease, subtract, lower, drop, fewer, and leftover. All right, moving on to multiplication. There's a little bit less to write here. First one is the answer to a multiplication problem. That's called a product. Next, I have times, multiply, multiplied by, multiplied to, any version of that word. The word of, we talked about this when we were talking about fractions. The word of tells us to multiply. That's an important one to remember, of. Then we've got ones that tell us specifically numbers to multiply by. So if I say the word double, that tells me to multiply, but specifically it tells me to multiply by 2. There's another word that tells me to multiply by 2, and that's the word twice. And again, that tells me to do times 2. Another common one is tripled or triple, and that tells me to multiply by 3. Yes, you could think of others. You could think of quadruple and things like that, but those are the most common ones. So again, pause here if you need to finish copying this column, but I'll read them off one more time. We have product, times, multiply, of, double, twice, and triple. Double is times 2, twice is times 2, triple is times 3. And the last column there is division. Our first one's going to be quotient. That's the answer to a division problem. Quotient. Next one, we have a couple small words in a row here. We have per. How much per day tells you to divide. Each. How much each month. Every. Per, each, and every are really, really common words that tell us we're going to divide. Next one, divided into or divided by, any version of the word divide. Split. We're going to split you into 5 groups, means we're going to divide by 5. Average. If you see average, you're going to be using division. And the very, very last one is mean. The mean and the average are talking about the same thing, and we will practice that more together this year. So again, I'm sorry for the sloppiness. I'm trying really hard to write neat, but I'll read through these again. Pause if you need to finish writing them down. We have quotient, per, each, every, divide, split, average, and mean. All right, so a couple quick details down at the bottom that we need to talk about. With phrases like less than, subtracted from, more than, divided into, the order of your number is going to flip. That means the first number is actually going to go after your operation sign, and the second number is going to go before the operation sign. So it flips your numbers around. The important thing there is that it flips them. That's the important part. So if I say 6 less than 7, that means I'm really doing 7 minus 6. It flips my numbers around. We're going to practice on the back, though. So go ahead and flip to the back of your paper. And we're going to translate these into numerical and algebraic expressions. The difference is numerical just has numbers in it. So that's like the top one there, the product of 6 and 12. Algebraic means we're going to be using a variable, which we talked about on the front side. Remember, a variable is it just a letter that represents a number. So if I say the product of 6 and 12, that means I am multiplying because the word product tells me to multiply. So the expression I would write here is 6 times 12. Remember, I use a dot to show multiplication. You're going to see that more often as we go on than the letter X, because what we're going to start seeing when we have to use a variable, X is a really, really common variable. So I want you guys to try and use the dot to show multiplication. So the one below says the product of 6 and a number. They don't tell me what the number is. When I don't know what the number is, that's when we use a variable. So I'm still doing multiplication because it says product. I'm still using the number 6, but instead of putting 12, I'm going to put a number. That means a variable, so I'm just going to put X. 6X means 6 times X. Since it doesn't tell you a specific letter to use, you could use Y, W, M, L, Q, whatever letter you really want to use. Moving on to the next one. This says 17 less than 20. Remember, this less than was one of the phrases where I've got to flip my order around. That means the 20 is going to go first. Less than tells me to subtract, and 17 will go second. So that would be 20 minus 17. Same idea with the next one. I have 17 less than a number. I am still flipping my order around. I'm still doing subtraction. So I'm still having subtraction. 17, since it flips, is going to go at the end. But instead of 20 at the beginning, I'm going to use a variable. You can use any variable you want. I'm going to use Y this time. So 17 less than a number is like Y minus 17. Moving on to the next one. It says the quotient of 34 and 2. Flip back to the front if you don't remember what quotient means. Look for it in those columns. But you should see that quotient tells you to divide. So that means if I'm finding the quotient of 34 and 2, I am doing 34 divided by 2. Same idea below, but instead I've got the quotient of a number and 2. So that means I can use any variable that I want. I'm going to use Z, or actually I'll use M this time. And I'm still dividing because it still says quotient. And this time I have the number 2 in there at the end. So the quotient of a number and 2 is M, or any variable you want, divided by 2. Last one on this top part here, we have 57 increased by 63. Increased by, flip back to the front if you need to. Think about what the word increase means. Does it tell you to add, subtract, multiply, or divide? You should find that increase means to add. So 57 increased by 63 is 57 plus 63. And the last one on this top part says a number increased by 63. So same idea, but instead of writing 57, I'm going to write a number, meaning a variable. You can use any variable you want. This time I'm going to use K. And increase still means plus, and I'm increasing it by 63, so it's plus 63. All right, last part of the notes. Thank you guys for hanging in there. This time, we're going to translate it into words. So we might be having to flip back to the front a little bit more, and that's okay. And there's going to be more than one possible answer we could write for these. But basically, just reading this out loud can give you a clue of how to write it. For example, that first one there. If I were to read that out loud, I would say 75 divided by 15. I can literally write that as my sentence. 75 divided by 15. That can be it. I could have gotten a little bit fancier if I wanted to, and I could have said the quotient of 75 and 15. I could have said 75 split into 15 groups, things like that. So you have more options, but reading them out loud usually gives you a pretty good clue as to what is an option for something to write. So if I go to the next one to the right there, 12 plus 92. I can literally write 12 plus 92, and that's going to be correct. I'm going to get a little fancier here. So flip back to the front. Look at your addition column, because that's what I have. I have an addition sign. Pick up one of those words to use instead of just the word plus. So I could say the sum of 12 and 92. I could say 92 more than 12. I could say 12 increased by 92, 12 added to 92, 12 raised by 92, 12 and 92 all together, the total of 12 and 92, 12 and 92 in all. Literally all of those are options you can write. So choose one of them and write it down. I'm going to write this time the sum of 12 and 92. So this time I chose to use the word sum. You don't have to use the same as me. You can really use any of those additional words on the front. If you need to, pause so you can finish writing, but I'm going to go ahead and move down to the next two. So remember, 17, then parentheses 6. We've talked about this. Parentheses tell me I'm multiplying. So I would read that as 17 times 6, which you can write down exactly like that, 17 times 6. Or you can flip to the front and find a different word to use. You could say the product of 17 and 6, 17 multiplied by 6, things like that. I'm going to just say this time 17 times 6. Keep it simple. If you want to write something different, that's okay too. The next one, again, if you read it out loud, you're going to have your answer. I could read 22 minus m. Another way I could say m is I could say a number. Remember, my variable is representing a number I don't know. So if I say a number, that works. I could also flip to the column about subtraction and find a different word to use. So I could say the difference of 22 and m, or a number less than 22. 22 decreased by the number m. All of these are options, plus all the others on there that I didn't say. You choose the one that you want to do. I'm going to say, I'll use lowered. So 22 lowered by, at this point I can say m or I can say a number. I'm going to say a number, and that's what you're going to see the most when you're doing problems like this on your own, is you're going to see the phrase a number when they're talking about a variable. So again, pause if you need to, finish writing your sentence down, and we've got two more. All right. When I have a number and a letter next to each other, like I do there, 25A, I cannot just write 25A because I don't have a word in there that tells me the operation I'm doing. Remember, operation means add, subtract, multiply, or divide. So we talked about this on the front when we were talking about variables and coefficients and things like that. When I have a number and a letter next to each other, so 25 and A are right next to each other, they're touching, that shows multiplication. So that shows 25 times A. I'm going to say it a little bit different. I'm going to say the product of $25 and a number. Okay, so again, the key here is you need to tell me some word that tells me I'm multiplying 25 and the variable. So you could just write 25 times A, or 25 times a number. You could say the product like I did. You could say 25 multiplied by the letter A. It's up to you, but you got to tell me some word in there that tells me I'm multiplying. You cannot just say 25A. All right, last one. I have n/4. Remember that slash means divide. So this really shows n divided by 4. And that's exactly what I can write down. I can literally write n divided by 4. I can also say the quotient of a number in 4. I could say 4 divided into the letter n. I can say it a bunch of different ways. I'm going to say this time kind of just what I read out loud. A number Here we go. A number divided by 4. All right, so main things we talked about in the notes today. On the front, we talked about what these different things are, what are expressions, what are variables, coefficients, constants, and terms. We're going to be practicing this more. So today is not the only day you're going to see these things. You're also going to see it tomorrow, later this week. You're going to see it in 7th and 8th grade. So these are things we're going to have you start trying to memorize. We're actually going to be doing something later that helps you practice memorizing what these things are. So you're going to use these notes later. You got to know what a coefficient, a variable, a constant, and a term are. After that, we talked about different words that tell us to add, subtract, multiply, and divide. And then last thing we did was actually practice writing expressions and phrases